enemies, not with your friends.
No, we do not make peace with people who are murdering children. Answer me that. Who put your parents in Gaza?
Between 1948
You're
and
not gonna
67 and 1967.
You've dodged every one of my questions.
It's not us who are rejecting the peace. I don't like the fact that
Let me skip
whoever's
this
trying to
intro.
promote that this is the moderate view and this is the extremist.
Arms.
Specific words for specific reasons. The Nakba, catastrophe, right? I want to offer my condolences. I believe that 33 members of your family were exterminated by the Zionist entity. So my question is, how is this worse than what initiated everything, which was the Nakba in 1948?
My grandparents were pushed out in 1948, where 700,000 Palestinians were unfortunately forced to leave their homes, and in some cases had no choice but to leave their homes. Since October 7th, over 2.1 million Palestinian people have had to leave their homes due to the catastrophe that Hamas's actions unleashed by attacking Israeli communities on October 7th. Quantitatively and qualitatively, Hamas's actions have triggered one of the worst catastrophes in the Palestinian people's history, whereby 50,000 Palestinians would still be alive had Hamas simply kept its soldiers at home on October 7th,
Right, so-
including family members of my own.
So by that logic, if Zionists wouldn't have colonized Palestine, then none of this would have began to begin with, right?
As a Palestinian who grew up in the Gaza Strip, what I can tell you is that
Who put you there?
the Gaza
Who
Strip
put you there?
had immense potential to be the pride and joy of the Palestinian.
Yo, he is dodging questions, bro. This dude, he just dodged 2 back-to-back questions. That's crazy. El debater.
People to prove that we are absolutely capable of having a functional state of our own that can rebuild our society, rebuild our heritage, reclaim our presence on the land.
The entirety of the land, or just because I believe your parents were in a refugee camp, right? They were forced into that.
There are nuances and complexities in
Well, who
history.
put them there?
Nuances and complexities.
that's a very
in-
objective
in,
thing.
in
Who put them
history
there?
that unfortunately
Zionists, right?
you unfortunately are not willing to listen to some of the nuances and the complexities. Do you know, for example,
Well,
that
just answer
in
that, like-
1948, in 1948, the Arab armies that were coming in to supposedly save the Palestinian people asked
From whom?
Palestinians
From whom?
asked
From the
Palestinians
Zionists,
to leave.
occupiers, yeah.
Asked Palestinians to leave. Disarm
He genuinely hasn't answered a question yet. He genuinely hasn't answered a question. This is crazy.
Palestinians and said, "Oh, this is a matter of 2 to 3 days."
So we agree that they should have been armed.
That's not my point. My point
You
is
said they
the
disarmed them as
history-
if it's a negative thing,
The
right?
history of the Nakba itself is so singularly focused on what happened from the point of view of Zionism and
The colonizers, right?
whereas I actually want to understand what happened with the Arab failures that have
To
put
stop
us.
the failures to stop Zionism, right?
Why wasn't a
from colonizing
Palestinian
Palestine, right?
state? Why wasn't a Palestinian state established between 1948 and
Because the
1967?
British were in control of the region, and we know for a fact that the Palestinian revolt was in opposition to the British, right? So when people talk about, oh, we've been opposing colonization for 75 years since the Nakba, add another 30 for British colonization of the region. Is that incorrect?
Between 1948 and
Is it
1967.
incorrect that the British
Who was in
colonized the
charge
region?
between 1948
Is
and
that incorrect?
1967?
You haven't answered a single one of my questions. I asked who put your parents in Gaza, and you were unwilling to answer that. Can you at least answer me that? Who put your parents in Gaza?
Between 1948
You're
and
not gonna-
67 and 1967.
You've dodged every one of my questions.
It's not dodging so much.
So just it's a very simple question. Who put your parents in a refugee camp?
On my mom's side, the Arab invading armies asked the invading armies to liberate the Palestinian people.
Why were they
asked
invading?
to supposedly stop the Zionist
From
invasion.
doing what?
From taking over the Palestinian people's lands in the areas that later on became Israel.
Okay, and you're okay with that?
I'm not okay with that.
Okay, so we
I
should
would
liberate
like-
that land.
80 years later, Israel is a
80.
recognized state that exists, that is recognized by the entirety of the international community. And this illusion that armed resistance is going to get rid of 7 million Jewish Israelis, 7 million.
We're talking getting rid of the Zionist occupation, the Zionist entity itself, right? The colonial forces.
So do you believe that there should be a space for the Jewish people?
There
on
always
the-
have been. What we're opposition to or opposing, I should say, is the Zionist entity itself. Why do Europeans have the right to colonize and impose a government on Palestinians? Why?
Well, I would say we should ask that to the
No, I'm
king of
asking you.
Jordan
I'm
at the
asking
time.
you. He's not here, unfortunately.
At the time, we should ask the Arab armies that came to liberate the Palestinian people.
Why
and
didn't they
ended
defeat
up,
the Zionists?
and ended up facilitating part of the Nakba by asking folks. My mom.
So you're blaming the Nakba on the Arab countries.
I'm blaming the failures of the Arabs and of the Palestinian leadership at the time in acting in the best interest of the Palestinian people, and then looking at 1948 to
This dude is getting fried, bro. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I'm really locked in on this. Like, he's actually getting cooked. Like, I don't know really 100% what's going on in this video. I don't know much about the Palestine and Israel, conflict, but what I'm looking at, I'm really leaning towards the guy with the goatee, the dude with the long hair, not the bald guy, but the other guy's argument, because the bald-haired guy really can't answer any of his questions.
1967. Why wasn't a Palestinian state established? Why wasn't it until 1964 that at the Arab League summit that the decision was made to create the Palestinian Liberation Organization and to push for Palestinian statehood? Why was Jordan allowed to annex the West Bank and Egypt annex the Gaza Strip?
To be very clear, I'm against that, but that's a regional conflict, right? That's a regional. What I'm opposed to is Europeans thinking they could colonize Palestine.
Do you
That's
know
the
that half
primary
of Jewish
contradiction,
Israelis?
right?
Do you
Well,
know
I'm
that
not talking
half of
about.
Jewish
No, I'm talking
Israelis
about the
are-
originators of the Zionist project. Can we agree that they were Europeans?
Not entirely, no.
The majority?
Not entirely.
There were majority secular Jews.
There were certainly some elements of the
majority was.
Zionist movement that certainly emerged out of Europe. But I'm saying right now, I am thinking about the future. I'm thinking about Gaza. What happened in Gaza on October 7th was not because of Zionism.
What happened in Gaza on October 7th?
What happened with the attack that Hamas launched as a terrorist organization. You have taken an entirely different approach to thinking about October 7th. You
Right.
have eaten up the Hamas propaganda that says October 7th happened because of Zionism.
And you're eating up
Because
the Zionist propaganda, right? Because I don't ever hear you bringing up, and I've seen many of your interviews, I don't see you ever bringing up the IOF, if you want to call them the IDF, the Hasenga, where they came from, right? They started as a terrorist militia, did they not? Were they not killed in
That's
British
irrelevant
soldiers? How is that irrelevant? That's where
to
they
the
came from,
fact.
and they continue to impose that upon the Palestinian population. I ask you, why is it that in the West Bank, there's nobody stopping all the
Are
colonization
you
that's still
Palestinian?
occurring?
Are you Palestinian?
I'm Mexican.
Have you lived in the Gaza Strip?
No, when you were run out, right? When you aligned yourself with
Are you Palestinian? No, I'm Mexican. Yo.
what was that organization you're involved with? Because
What-
I know you work for the Atlantic Council right now, right?
Do you know anything about my history?
Yes, I do.
So tell me,
Your
what is my
parents
history?
were forced into Gaza, were they not? They grew up in a refugee camp, were they not?
Do you know anything about Hamas and how it treats Palestinians in the Gaza Strip? Do you know
Not
anything?
worse than Israelis and Zionists treat them.
Do you know
So-
that in the past 2 days,
So we agree.
Hamas executed dozens of Palestinians who were hungry, who were desperate, as Hamas was looting.
Dozens of Palestinians, meanwhile, the Zionist entity
pause.
exterminated 33 of your family members?
Pause. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Hi, Danny. My name's Ahmed.
Daniel, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So I want to shift the conversation a little bit.
Please.
You said that October 7th was one of the most detrimental things to Palestinians, correct? I would beg to differ because I think the fact that, also, let's not pretend like October 7th was an isolated incident. It didn't come out of nowhere. It came after years and years and years of occupation, oppression, and siege. Okay? So on October 7th, when the resistance took place, because it wasn't an isolated incident, it also happened to take place during a time where social media was rampant. So for the first time in a really long time, Palestine was in every conversation. Most everybody that you know could talk about Palestine in one way or another. They knew about what was going on, and for the first time, we are hearing people recognize how detrimental the IDF has been and the occupation has been in history. And I think that the fact that it took place during a time where social media was at its height, we're seeing people on the ground, we're seeing people take videos of the rubble of their homes, we're seeing people have to makeshift water filters so that they can have drinkable water. We are seeing
Shorty right there, she's making a good point. She's making really good points. She's making really good points. See, I like her approach to this. I really do.
children get shot for collecting rainwater. We are seeing children dying and starving and emaciated infants and For the first time, it's not just on the news. It's on your phone. We're watching a genocide take place on our phones, and most everybody is talking about it. So how can you say that October 7th was so detrimental to the Palestinians when it is the first time that it has been brought to heightened media attention?
Well, I share your horror in what's happening in Gaza. I mean, it is an unimaginable level of death and destruction and pain and suffering and hunger. And in some cases, I mean, people like being burnt in their tents and all the really horrible level atrocities that I have called out. And I have said that the Israeli government and military have committed war crimes. I've actually overtly said that.
I mean, it doesn't take much to recognize that.
But my point is, I don't want my people and my family and my community and my beautiful Gaza that has meant so much to the Palestinian people there and to what remains of my family to merely become a social media phenomenon where it is on display for people to look at and say, wow, look at this, is so horrible.
That's the only way. That's the only way that they can get people to recognize just how bad it really is, because there is no...
Did he say that he doesn't want there to be awareness brought to the conflict? Or am I bugging? Is that what y'all got? That's what I got.
No mainstream media covering what has been going on for 80 years. It's all skewed media.
So may I just clarify, because if so, that sounds really awful what I just heard you say. You're saying that you want to see images of dead Palestinians. You want to
No
see...
one wants to see those images. But if that's what it takes to get people to recognize what's actually going on instead of another Middle Eastern war, then that's what it takes. It's tragic that that's what it took.
Do you recognize that Hamas, in official communiques, has and publicly and overtly has made it clear that part of their strategy relies on causing maximum death and destruction in Gaza, so that the ensuing
in response to Netanyahu blatantly saying that his goal is ethnic cleansing.
May I just finish this point, please? That Hamas wants to generate maximum death and destruction on the ground in Gaza in hopes that the ensuing imagery can actually rile up the international community, rile up folks in the Western diaspora on college campuses, so that then this could delegitimize Israel, so that this could stop the war. I'm talking about facts on the ground as somebody who has so much attachment to the reality of Gaza on a daily basis. My brother is there right now running one of the biggest medical NGOs. He has 70 direct reports that are doing work that's saving lives. I hear from folks from the protesters.
There wouldn't be
Hamas.
lives to save if there was no occupation.
How about
your brother would not have to run an NGO if the occupation never existed and they weren't constantly bombing and killing children.
My brother was there.
Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your
Thank
seat.
you very much, Dana. Hi, Evan. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you as well. So I think one of the issues with your framing in that October 7th is leading to what we're seeing, the genocide today in Gaza, is the explanation that what is happening is inevitable. Genocides are not inevitable. This is the first armed conflict since the Rwandan genocide in which the majority of deaths overall are women and children. The October of Gaza had some of the worst bombing campaign that we've seen since the Korean War or World War II. This type of level of destruction is not inevitable. This shows the explicit aims of the Israeli war cabinet, which they have explicitly endorsed as being a part of, for example, Trump's proposed plan.
I like how they can come in and they can debate. They can debate maturely. There's no bias between who gets to the seat first. Like, dang, this guy just beat me to the seat, I'm gonna raise my flag early. That's not how they're thinking. They're thinking, I want to prove this individual wrong, and this isn't just me. This is a group effort, and we all have to change this man's opinion. And there's no point in us fighting when we all have a common goal. You know what I'm saying?
Plan of ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip. The goal, for example, right now, with the complete blockage of food and aid, is to make Gaza uninhabitable. We cannot say that this is an inevitable consequence of armed resistance, which armed resistance is an inevitable consequence of occupation. What makes Hamas's argument for armed resistance is the fact that in the West Bank, where the PA operates as basically an administrative state for the Israeli government and actually goes insofar as to protect settlers, what that actually does is it functions as to make the case for Hamas to have instances of armed resistance. For the last you brought up why we haven't had like a Palestinian state. For the last 2 decades, Israel hasn't even been interested in that. And that's even to say that they were, for example, interested within the Oslo period, which I don't think was actually the case.
So the fact on the ground remains that 50,000 Palestinians would still be alive had Hamas made a different choice, had they simply kept their fighter.
That girl really wants to get up there. That girl really wants to get up there. She really wants to get up there.
At home on October 7th, I recognize the imbalance of power dynamics between Palestinians and Israelis, but with clearly the Israelis, if I may finish this point, within said imbalance, there exists plenty of room for Palestinian agency and accountability and responsibility, such that October 7th was a choice. It was not an inevitability.
But you think the 50,000 Palestinians that are you're saying that that's an inevitability, though, and I'm saying that no genocide is inevitable. But that's exactly the framing of the point that you just brought up, is you said that October 7th is what's causing what's happening right now in Gaza. What's causing what's happening right now in Gaza is the Israeli state.
Hamas served our people, the defenseless Palestinian people, on a silver platter to the most far-right government in Israel's history. What did you expect would happen?
Actually, Israel served that. They did everything they could to undermine Fatah and support groups like Hamas. So
well, I'm glad you brought that point up, because what happens in Gaza doesn't stay in Gaza. The fact that Hamas was propped up by the Netanyahu government and by the Netanyahu regime should tell you everything you need to understand to delegitimize this group, to understand that they were used to undermine the Palestinian Authority.
This has to be so tedious mentally. Like, to sit there and debate like these intelligent individuals, like this would tire me out, like mentally. Like, I'd be exhausted.
In the West Bank, which I don't subscribe to the Palestinian authorities,
Sure,
the entirety of their approaches, but the Palestinian Authority was the closest thing we had to a political framework that in the 90s, when I lived in Gaza and I experienced the tail end of the Oslo peace process, a time of immense hope and optimism we went from having, to me, peace and coexistence with Israel and pragmatism meant that we shed the Egyptian travel document and we got a Palestinian passport. It meant that we had an airport in the Gaza Strip. We flew in, my family and I, in 1999 and in 2000 on the Palestinian Airlines.
Sure.
That was undermined by failures on the Palestinian leadership side and by Hamas's rise to undermine the Palestinian nonviolent approach.
I'll be the first to say, I think Palestinians have every right to criticize their own leadership. I think that you can always, it's always good to...
Sorry, you've been voted out. Please return
Thank
to
you
your
very
seat.
much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
He was trying to get that point off, boy. He was trying to get that point off. Props to him for trying to get that point off. I mess with that. Props to him for trying to get that point off.
Hi, Josh. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Okay, so I think you use language very loosely. We said genocide, and we said colonization, and you said taking over. You say so many things to diminish the words and the language. You use your personal experience, which is horrible, in your terms is abhorrent. You should never have to deal with that. But to place the onus on Hamas is so despicable, because the reason that Hamas is there, you just said, was propped up by Israel. Why were they propped up? Because they wanted to take out the PLO. Why did they want to take out the PLO? Because they were actually going to create some dissonance with Israel. Another thing you have failed to mention is U.S. intervention on leading Israel, the veto power of the P5. When you said Palestine has not been legitimized, why is that? How many times has it been brought up to the supposed council, right? And been voted out by who? Who opposes it? 98% of the time it's the United States with the P5 veto power, because they want to have a party like the Saudis and the Israelis in order to take control of the Swana region. And another thing you said, you wanted to utilize and place blame and shift blame to the Arab people during all these catastrophes. Yes, it's after the Millet system and after the government that were getting propped from World War II, people were just scrambling, trying to figure out how to live. And when you had European colonization shifting lines to create boundaries in order to say, this is now Palestine, this is now this is now that, of course people are going to be groveling, trying to figure out how to do it. And you used Jordan. What did Israel do to Jordan and to Palestine in 3 days, mind you? 3 days, they bombed the crap out of them and took their land, took the Golan Heights, took this and that. This is not a one-time occurrence, and this is happening. It's going to continue happening, and armed resistance is necessary, because Fanon said that the colonized can only liberate themselves through armed resistance. And you want to delegitimize Hamas, but that makes no sense to me. We use the term terrorist. Terrorist now makes it so Hamas can't even plead for help, because if you're labeled a terrorist, you can't go to the UN, you can't go to this and that. And let me tell you one thing, this one thing I'll say is, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter.
All right. So time is up. I'm going to ask you to return to your seat.
Thank you.
That was a very well-spoken African-American man. I respect that a lot. I saw him come up with the stuff on his teeth, the stuff in his dreads and all that stuff that had on, the all that. And I really didn't expect much from him. I really didn't expect much from him. I didn't expect him to be that well-spoken, to have that much knowledge on the topic. but he rarely like changed my mind. Like, that is a well-spoken African American man, and he gave a beautiful argument to the whole situation and how he's using his own personal experiences with, which isn't right.
Surrounded is now a podcast, available wherever you listen.
Resistance will get the Palestinians nowhere.
Armed resistance will get the Palestinians nowhere. Hamas terrorism is not a viable path to statehood.
Hamas's terrorism is not a viable path to statehood. Nice to meet you, brother.
Hey.
Thank you.
So I want to do two things before we start. First is I'll answer probably some of the questions you'll ask me. I'm not Palestinian. I'm also not infallible. So I hope I get fact-checking this, because my biggest objective is to try to get to objective truth. And what I do know objectively is that the apartheid and the oppression that's been happening for the past 75 years is not something that's sustainable within the region of Gaza. So I think the claim is precisely worded in a way to make it seem like anyone that sits here is saying, I support every single action that's done by Hamas. And I want to make clear that my big reason in sitting in contention to your claim is to say that the framing is very intentional. And the moral outrage that's put on colonized resistance is doing the bidding of Israel and the oppression structure. So it's important to me to recognize what are the real causes of these types of violence. It's a state that does not allow aid. It controls the food and water. It has restricted access to people's freedom of movement. It's controlling the ports. And the list could go on about why people feel like they have no other means in order to fight back. You said in the claim, armed resistance is not an effective strategy. What are we seeing with the nonviolent actions? The BDS movement has been condemned internationally by many different states. This is not something that's going to lead to the liberation of Palestinian people. We need to challenge the power structure of the United States and its support of a regime like Israel. That's the only way to stop violence that continues to occur within both regions.
Well, I really do appreciate your concern for the Palestinian.
I really like his beard. That might be a little off topic, but I really like that guy's beard. Hey, thank you to all 6 of y'all on the live right now. Don't forget to follow, turn on notifications, and it will really make my day if you could stay tuned to my live stream, man.
People, and we need non-Palestinian allies to be a part of the broader effort, and we need a multi-pronged strategy. My thing with armed resistance is that as the weaker party in a conflict like what we're seeing in Israel and Palestine, particularly in the Gaza Strip, where you have a vulnerable population that has been under, on the one hand, an sense of isolation for almost 2 decades, and on the other hand, the control of a nefarious terrorist organization and that has Islamized the society, if I may finish, please, that has pushed the Palestinian people to the brink of catastrophe. I think there's an extra onus. I am a believer that you have a responsibility, you being Hamas and Palestinian leadership, have a responsibility to be a good custodian of your people. You do not poke a government that has Ben Gvir and Smotrich in it and carry out the single worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust and expect things.
Peep that what he said.
Single worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust and expect things not to go horribly for you. So that's number one. Number two is the monopolizing of the word resistance. And I added armed resistance because guess what? Of course, I believe in different forms of resistance. Unfortunately, in today's context, the word resistance has become monopolized to almost exclusively mean Hamas and violence and terrorism.
I have to interject here, and I appreciate everything that you've said, but if you've seen, even in demonstrations in Gaza, there have been multiple protests saying that Hamas is not effective leadership. So to say that Hamas is representative of the Palestinians' approval is not something that you can say wholeheartedly. Again, I think you focusing on Hamas is doing the bidding of Israel. We need to talk about how we're going to end the occupation. That needs to be done by multiple countries coming together in support of a people that's been oppressed for almost a century now.
That is a brilliant point that you just brought. That is precisely what I'm desperately
but your
trying
focus
to
here,
do.
and you're coming here, is focusing on Hamas.
Because
October 7th is not an isolated event. You don't get October 7th without October 1948, without October 1967, and every day that's happened since then, under 75 days of occupation, suppression, and siege. The bombings, the indiscriminate killings of civilians is not something that's sustainable. And if you look proportionally at how many people died on October 7th, which I don't know how many people would justify civilian death, but if you look at those numbers versus what has been happening in Gaza since the occupation started, this is not a proportionate conflict. And I don't even like using the term conflict, because conflict it assumes that there's two equal, equivocal positions. This is a colony. It's a colonization, and that's not something that's justified. Why are we critiquing the actions of the colonized people instead of those that are doing the colonizing in the first place?
I respectfully disagree with the idea that this didn't. I mean, this had a starting point, a tactical starting point on October 7th, whereby a specific act that was a choice triggered where we're at right now. And if I may say, what I'm
It sounds like you're saying the best strategy of the Palestinian people is to lay back and just let Israel do what they want. You can't fight back. You can't try to have any sort of action against your oppressors. Just take it. Take the genocide until they feel like they can get rid of it.
Thank you for coming through. Appreciate
You've been
it.
voted out.
Appreciate it. Thank you, brother. I will. Thank you for coming.
That dude in the red, when he gets up, he gonna talk his shit. Cause I've been seeing him, his knees shaking, his hands shaking, everything shaking back there, shaking and baking, and he's been wanting to get up there and make his statement. I've seen it this whole time.
So first off, my condolences to all your family members who will be lost. I'm also from Gaza. I'm from the Oswald family. We're from Yafa as well, and I used to live in Gaza as well. I left in 2001 during the Second Intifada, which I believe you were there.
Mm-hmm.
Nearly lost your life by an Israeli airstrike. Your two friends were killed in front of you, I believe, and this left you partially deaf. Am I correct? Hamas wasn't in charge yet at that time, were they?
They were rising, but no, they were not in charge. But they were very much so rising.
But so during the Intifada, which by the way, I think Fatah and Palestinian Preventive Security have initiated this or added to it. But during this time, the PLO, the PA, Fatah was in charge of Gaza, and Israel is the one who killed your family. Israel is the one who killed your friends, right? Israel is the one who left you with PTSD, and I commend you for being public about that and sharing that information. But when I was there living in Gaza, I remember Mohammed al-Durra when he was killed. I was 3 years old. I vividly remember that. This is one of my earliest memories. All I can think of was, why was this little boy killed in his father's lap, right? So, and again, who killed him? Israel. Israel is the reason why the Palestinians are suffering and have been suffering for over 77 years. So I wanted to talk about armed resistance because that was a claim. Armed resistance is a right under international law. We need to look at the reason why there's armed resistance in the first place, right? So context matters. So Israel, being the occupier, having a military occupation of Gaza, the West Bank, Israel increasing its settlements, Israel being an apartheid state, Israel making our lives hell, not looking at us as humans. This is the root cause of the issue, and armed resistance is a byproduct of all this garbage. Hamas formed in 1987 during the first Intifada, right? So they formed as an armed resistance group in 1987. There would be no need for resistance if there wasn't a military occupation. So you have anything to add?
No, and first of all, delighted to finally speak to a fellow Gazan like that. Even when we disagree, that to me is far more important than, with all due respect to some other allies that suck up the oxygen out of the room, that feel the need to speak over Palestinians, that act in a very disrespectful manner. I really appreciate you being here. And so, do you know that in the 80s, when Hamas was born out of Mujamma al-Islami, the Islamic complex, their budget, what came out of the military governor, that the Israeli military system that ran the military occupation, their budget was literally allocated to them by the military governor. Their first victims for this resistance group in the 1980s were women in Shara Umar al-Mukhtar street to wear the hijab to cover themselves up, and suspected traitors and collaborators with the Israeli army and the Israeli police in the 1980s, before they laid a finger on an Israeli soldier or an Israeli settler in Gaza. Palestinians were the first victim of Hamas, which is so classic of the Muslim Brotherhood offshoot, so classic of the ISIS and Al-Qaeda style thinking of Sayyid Qutb and all those people. But let's put that aside. 2005, if you want to support armed resistance, I'm playing a hypothetical here. Was there not an opportunity to say, okay, the Israeli military and the settlers are directly out. We can talk, they repositioned the troops around Gaza. We can talk about all that. This was a unique opportunity to say, okay, armed resistance in Gaza is done. We are now in the nation building phase. We are now in the phase to turn Gaza into the pride and joy.
It's one Palestinian versus 20 protesters right now. It's a debating resistance, Adrian. That's what we're watching right now.
Of the Palestinian people, to turn Gaza into a role model for what an occupation-free West Bank would look like. What did we get instead? Instead, we enabled the far-right elements in Israel to say, oh my God, no, and I'm not saying I agree with this, but say, oh my God, we can't end the occupation in the West Bank because they'll turn it just like in Gaza. So that's that. And then finally, I will say that when you are the weaker party, The onus is on you to protect your people. A resistance that fails, a resistance that is there to not protect its people. Gaza is the first place in history
Sorry,
where the
if
resistance.
I can add one more thing. Sorry, real quick.
Please.
So this 2005, when Israel withdrew from Gaza, they didn't end the occupation of Gaza. They switched the style of occupation. So Israel still controls the borders, the airspace, the land, what's coming in, what's going out. It made Gaza a living hell. In 2012, the UN said Gaza will be unlivable by 2020. It's 2025 now, and clearly, like, they destroyed all aspects of life, all aspects of infrastructure, hospitals, schools. I've lost over hundreds of family members. As young as 3 months old, Hanan Asfour, she was 3 months old and she was killed. She was not part of Hamas, clearly. And we lost people like in their 80s, So I've lost my grandfather. He also died as a result of the siege on Gaza. And by the way, right now there's over a 2-month blockade of no food, no humanitarian aid, no water coming in Gaza by Israel, and the world is just watching this. This is insane. The ICC has issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant because of war crimes against the people of Gaza.
Do you believe that Hamas bears any responsibility in our people's suffering?
This is a byproduct of Israeli occupation. By the way, before October 7th, from 2007 till October 7th, 2023, over 6,700 Palestinians were killed by Israel because of the 4 major assaults that Israel launched on Gaza. By the way, not to mention the siege on Gaza as well. So I wasn't able to see my grandfather. Last time I saw him, I was 4 years old, and he died in 2024. I wasn't able to see him because of the siege. He couldn't leave, and I couldn't go visit Gaza. So this is impacting all aspects of life. You expect people to like worship their occupiers? No one's gonna go kiss their ass if they've been killing us, displacing us, and starving us, and killing our children, making our children orphans, without limbs. Like you gotta be realistic here.
No one said anything about loving what Israel is doing. All I'm saying is that I think a variety of different actions and strategic choices by Hamas and others in Gaza could have led to radically different choices.
But how do we make peace with people who don't even see us as humans? Why do we even talk to people who don't give a... They don't care about me, they don't care about you. They look at us as goyim and all this bullshit. They look at us as like Gentiles.
I would respectfully disagree in that I have made contacts. You cannot paint the entirety of the Israeli society and community with a singular brush. Just like we can't paint all Palestinian. They unfortunately have not talked to anyone from Gaza. And I have made a point of connecting with hostage families, with survivors of October 7th.
Why talk with a boot on your neck? You know what I'm saying?
It's not a boot. It's an equalized relationship.
Pause. You've been voted out.
Thank you, brother. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, I think that's all from me on this video. Thank y'all for everybody who tuned in to this particular video. I'm not in it live, but I think I'm gonna switch to something else and turn this into a part 2. Definitely go check out my YouTube VHL_Huey. I'm probably gonna record my part 2 either tomorrow or later tonight. I might do it alone. I might do it on a stream. I don't know. But yeah, thank y'all for tapping in, man, with this particular video. Wow. Hurry up, bro. Claps. Shut your no attention span 12-year-old never knows nothing about the world. Head ass up. Okay. Shut up.